Call to order the regular June meeting of the Finance Committee. Let me begin by saying I understand we have some visitors here from the Greensboro City Council. Welcome. You picked the best committee to come. You can see some pros in action here. And I will try to give a few notes of explanation as we go. We do break our meeting down into general items and consent items. The consent items are done with one motion unless anyone pulls something off. I will also comment this is a little bit of a special meeting in that we are currently in our budget season, and as soon as we finish all the regular items that are on the agenda, we will then deal with the budget, and hopefully we'll be out by 6 o'clock so that public safety can meet. With that, are there any items anyone would like pulled off of the consent? And the chair would like C3 pulled. Any others from anyone? I'll give y'all a check a second. Look. I will say on, Greg, which one do we have the corrected language on?
C7.
C7 at your place is the corrected language. There's a few typos in it. What was that, Ms.?
I would like, it's either C7 or C8. We can talk about C8. It's
C8. Okay, I have C3 and C8. Any others that anyone wants to pull? Yes, Mr.
C10.
C10. Wait. Miss Light, did you have one that you would? Okay. Do I hear a motion to approve the balance?
Second.
We have a motion to second approve the balance. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise. We will then start with the consent item, and we'll just go in numerical order. We'll start with C3.
Request for financial assistance for Whole Man Ministries in the amount of $263,917.
Mr. Ritchie, I see your name here. Could you come up and give us a few-minute explanation of this?
Good evening, Chairman, Mayor, members of the committee.
Good evening.
This particular item is an item where we're requesting financing authorization for $263,917 for the financing of the rehabilitation of 2 units located on Cameron Avenue. The 2 units are part of a 5-unit project that belonged to Whole Man Ministry. There were 5 duplex units that had sat for a long time, really eyesores in the neighborhood, actually slated for demolition. They were in very bad condition. Whole Man Ministries was able to obtain title to the property, and they were working with a number of nonprofit and other organizations to provide housing for homeless veterans. This particular project, in addition to providing housing for homeless veterans, it would provide housing for veterans with large families. Mm-hmm. So we were able to put a mix of funds together, utilizing lead grant funds and some other sources of funds that we had that, and quite frankly, took it above the $100,000 cap that normally the rehab loan committee would have authorization to approve. So because of that, we are bringing it to you guys after the fact to get authorization. These 2 units are great units. They were transformed into 2 3-bedroom single-family houses. The work looks magnificent. It will provide housing for large families. BB&T, Wachovia, a list of other partners that you see listed on your card have participated in this project. Everyone that have looked at these units are very amazed at the quality of work that was done. So we're asking authorization to proceed with the financing.
And who will own them, and are they renting them, or what are they doing?
Whole Man Ministries will own them. It is a loan. They will be paying the money back to the city.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Ms.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I will agree that is something that needs to be done, but I want to ask, when you're saying $293,000, now
263.
Now, how many units are we talking about?
We're talking 2 3-bedroom houses.
All right, so you're saying 2 houses. I would like to know a little bit more about the 263,000, 2 houses, how you investing into these houses, and who's going to be monitoring, who's going to be paid. Just how is that? I know it's money that they're borrowing, but you may not can give that to me today. But those would be some questions. If we're spending $263,000, I hit 2 units, then that's, if you just look at 2 into 263,000, then a unit costs how much money are we investing on a unit?
Okay?
That will help me, Mr. City Manager, to better
Okay.
be able, because I'm not going to vote on it today. I'm not against it. but I
Okay.
won't be voting.
Ms. Adams?
Ms.
Oh,
Councilmember
Ms.
Light.
Light, excuse me.
What about the other three, say there were 5 overview places? Are they rehabilitated or
The remaining 3 units are being rehabilitated by volunteers from the various nonprofit and profit-making organizations. Lowe's, Home Depot, a number of the builders have donated material. The banks, BB&T, Wells Fargo, a number of other institutions, electrical contractors, they provided in-kind services, and actually one of those units have been repaired. The other 3 units were repaired as still single-family duplexes. So you've got one structure with 2 one-bedroom units. And that is what contributed to the cost of the rehab on the 3, because we took 2 one-bedroom units and converted it to 3 three-bedroom houses.
Mr. Montgomery?
Yes, a couple comments. One, the overall project and development here on Cameron, I think, has been something that's been good for that neighborhood. When Whole Man Ministries came to the table a few years back and had the first desire to be engaged in this neighborhood, we all came to the table and they partnered to help do the development. I'm not sure that I don't see anybody here. I don't see Pastor Washington or anyone else here from Whole Man Ministry. It would have been well if they were present as an organization for particularly this dollar amount to have someone here. And I know I asked the same question that Councilman Burke had in terms of the specific dollar amount, because when I first saw that, it seemed to be an extremely high amount of dollars for 2 units. But in conversation with staff, it was stated in terms of the nature of the work being done and the remediation that was necessary, and as well as the historic nature of those properties. It has been stated that the bricks within those buildings that line there on Cameron Avenue are George Black bricks in several of those units that are along Cameron Avenue as well. So I think we've been able to do successfully, and I've been inside of those units and have seen the transformation inside of those units. It'd be something that I personally would feel comfortable living in, just in terms of the high standard of transformation in those units. But I too had the question in terms of that dollar amount, in terms of whether or not it was effective to put that much resources into 2 units. But by staff's assessment, that is on par in terms of what it's going to cost to do the redevelopment.
Yes, I will add the units are all historic. 1 unit had to be made handicap accessible. This includes also exterior repairs, driveway, lawnscaping. It was a total transformation. It went out to bidders, so 3 bidders bid on the project after staff did their initial cost estimate. So we feel comfortable that the costs we received were all costs that were reasonable for the project.
Mr. McIntosh? Oh, excuse me. I didn't know you had your hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. To the committee, the other 2 council members, I am a big supporter of this. Anything that we can do for our veterans, anything that we can do for those that are physically or mentally challenged, I am all for that. But I think we might need a little bit more information, the vetting process like we do for everybody else. We just need to see some details about the 501c3, all the works they've done. I'm very proud of the partnerships that we have here. That's what we need in this community. Again, it's the cities, industries, and different organizations step up to help this. But I too would like to see more. And I do see, Mr. Brooks, that the lead grant is a forgivable loan, that $38,300.
That's correct. That's a forgivable loan. After 3 years, that loan will be forgiven, as is one of the requirements before the lead grant program. So it's an encumbrance on the property for 3 years, as long as you market affirmatively to families with children under the age of 6. And that's one of the reasons why we did the transformation to the 3-bedroom units, so you could make some units available for large homeless families.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Mr. McIntosh?
My eyes kind of popped when I saw the number as well, but then I thought back and I remember I've been through those buildings, and they were designed as duplexes. So bringing them back to single family, the level of work that was needed, I'm not surprised at the number. I mean, it's high, but that was a challenging redo.
For the regular meeting, I'm still confused. When you say you have in here, and I'm quoting 5 one-bedroom duplexes, does that mean they were 10 one-bedroom apartments?
Correct.
Okay, because it makes it sound like they were 5. So there are actually 10 one-bedroom
10
apartments
one-bedroom apartments.
encompassed in 5 duplexes.
That's correct.
And I would be curious as to how many of these our money was used for. Is it just the 4?
The 4.
Okay. I would still raise the issue. We spent $131,000 for a 3-bedroom house, what we did, and whether or not that was the best use, whether or not we should have just torn them down and started from scratch. I don't know the neighborhood that well, and I probably have seen these but don't remember them, but that just sounds like an awful lot of money to spend on one house.
I understand the concern, and we'll provide you with copies of the write-up that includes the line item cost and other information that hopefully will satisfy your questions.
Yes. Well, why don't you give me the tax value and comparable homes for sale in the neighborhood? I think that's you could spend $1 million on a 3-bedroom house. That doesn't mean it's a $1 million house. So anyway, yes, Ms. Montgomery.
First part I was going to ask in terms of how time sensitive was. I hear a lot of questions around it. Does this have to move now? I have not talked with anyone from Whole Man Ministries personally, so I don't know of anything, and I don't know from staff standpoint, is this something that has to move now, or the timeliness of the nature of this item?
Yes, it is time sensitive from the standpoint of one of our better contractors worked on this project. It's a contractor who typically does not request draws on his work, and he has about over $100,000 invested in the project. He has not received a draw yet, so we would like to get him paid as quickly as possible. However, I understand the concern that you have, and I believe we can get you all the information you need before the Monday's meeting. And if you have any questions, we'll be more than pleased to try to address them prior to that.
And the second piece is not a question but a comment. I live within less than half, I don't know, not a full mile, I think, from where these are located. And I know Councilman Clark asked the tax value on there. I don't think you get the tax value on the properties. It's not going to give a good assessment. So with that, I think we can get real market value in terms of what we're looking at on that. Because for what my tax value on my house is now, since the revaluation, because that's one of the neighborhoods that was dramatically reduced in terms of tax value costs in that area. So if we look at market value in that when we get those numbers, I think that'll be well.
And I believe what we should be able to get you is an after rehab appraised value.
That's fine, yeah. Mr. Taylor, you had it.
Yeah, I just want to say that I think the committee did well to ask these questions and to ask for additional information. Whole Man Ministries is actually in the Southeast Ward, but the project is going on, I think, in the Northeast Ward and very close to the east. So after speaking with the organization, this is a little bit time sensitive. I just asked that we move forward. It sounds like the committee is looking at possibly moving forward, at least without a recommendation, to give some time to get the additional information. So I just asked the committee to consider that request.
Okay. Any other questions, comments?
Just comment
Go
for
ahead.
the records. It was once in the northeast, but sits in the east now.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. And the last comment from the chair, and then I'll get a motion. It sounded like to me the money's already been spent. Is that correct?
The money has been encumbered. And yes, the project is, one house is 85% complete. The
Yeah.
other house is probably 70% complete.
Just as an editorial comment, I think you should have gotten council approval before you did it versus asking, you're asking for forgiveness after the fact. I mean, if we vote not to do it, what are you going to do?
I'll be up the creek without a paddle.
Yeah, that's what. Okay, anyway.
Actually, what happened, it did go before our Rehabilitation Loan Committee,
Yeah.
who have looked at projects in the past over $100,000. For some reason, when we tried to enter this into the system, it was flagged by our purchasing department, rightfully so, that said that you need to get a higher approval on this. But the Rehabilitation Loan Committee, you have the city's chief financial officer, the budget officer, and one of the assistant city managers on the panel that reviewed and vetted this before
We'll have a lot of people to blame then.
Didn't want to go down by myself.
The preacher this Sunday, the preacher said you should always do something with a committee because you have more people to share the blame with. Anyway, Ms. Garrity.
Let the records.
Wait. Y'all behave. We have company here.
Fortunately, I wasn't on that committee, but the what we did find out was in the past a loan committee had a informal. We couldn't find the formal authority where they were doing up to 2 rehab projects a year in excess of $100,000. The city attorney and I both questioned that, and we weren't able to find anything in the record where this council had given that authority to staff. So that's why it's before you.
Okay. I would suggest we have a motion to send it forward without recommendation. That way, I understand the timelessness, and if we sign a contract with a contractor to do the work and he should be paid. Yes, ma'am.
I move that we send this to council without a recommendation.
Second.
We have a motion, a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise. That is sent forward.
Thank you.
The next one is C8. Secretary, read that, please.
Consideration of items relating to Federal Transit Administration Section 5307 funds for fiscal year 2015 for job access reverse commute projects.
Can you give us a 1-minute summary?
Yes, thank you, Chairman and members of City Council. Section 5307 money is from Federal Transit Administration. A sub-allocation of that money goes to the Job Access Reverse Commute Program. That money is then, we send out a call for projects, we receive projects, we have them evaluated by the staff at Greensboro and Part, and then that comes back to your grant allocation committee for approval. So what you have before you today is the list of projects.
Thank you. Ms. Adams, you want to?
Yes, thank you very much. What I'm interested in, I guess, with all of the conversations we've been having during budget session, is that this deals with transportation, and this is going somewhere else. We're getting ready to do, we're in the process of doing the route meetings for the mass transit. Again, it goes back to what we were saying about duplication of work and processes. And within both of these, C7, C8, and maybe even C9, I'm not sure, I think we need to see where the mass transit, because today on my phone I had 28 phone calls about the routes, council. And so therefore, when I was reading this, I thought, okay, are we duplicating services? Are we missing something? Because my folks are telling me they don't want their routes changed, or they can't have the routes not coming through. But when you read through what JARC does, it provides transportation for low income, people that are receiving public assistance, veterans, physically, mentally challenged. And I just need to know that. So if somebody can bring that back to me, how they tie together, what's the relationship between this and our mass transit with TransAid and all those other things.
Okay, thank you very much. Do we have a motion to approve?
I move for approval.
Second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise. We will now do the last consent item, which is C10. If the Secretary would read that, please.
Ordinance designating certain property as a historic landmark. Chatham Manufacturing Company, Western Electric Company, located at 800 through 850 Chatham Road, just for the interior. Public hearing scheduled for July 20th, 2015.
Mr. Montgomery asked for this.
Yes, I do. I don't want to need a presentation on it. Just simply want to make a comment in reference to it, and this is in Councilman McIntosh's ward, but particularly on items that are related to historic landmark. I'm consistent in the sense of asking and having dialogue around it, and I know that developers on this have made commitments, and I just want to speak to that, which I think is good in terms of the commitment made by the developers in this, in terms of including a number of workforce units within the project and the property. And so I say my kudos to them in this process, and hopefully speak to other developers who are doing work within our community, that they will follow that same type of lead in terms of their project and their development, that they can find ways to integrate those type of units within the market rate units that they have in their development. I think this is going to be a grand development there in the Northwest Ward, but for the city as a whole. But again, just want to say my salutes to the developers on that.
Mr. McIntosh, you had your hand up.
Yeah, just a question about process. This is the second one of these that's come back to us for an interior certification after we've already had the exterior. That's not, going forward, that's not the plan, right? I mean, we're going to look at these things as a whole versus an inside and outside whenever possible.
Exactly. Unfortunately, the last two, there was an administrative error, and it literally is just a check of a box. But in this one, the HRC actually had reviewed the whole interior for the project, so we've actually, the intent was always there, and the developer always had that intent also. So I do believe, and the State Historic Preservation Office has also said they fully support both the exterior and the interior. So we are now being hyper vigilant about that with our new applications.
Thank you.
Okay, do I have a motion to approve?
Move approval.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise, that is approved. We will now go to the,
Mr. Chairman,
oh, excuse me.
may I ask an indirect
Yes, you may.
question of Ms. McCullough?
Yes.
This is the historical research book that we received the other day.
Yes, yes.
And I had a concern now. The city contracted the person to do the book.
Correct. The
And-
Historic Resource Commission,
Yes.
yes, in the city.
Then where did the funds come from?
The project was funded, portions of the project was a matching grant with the State Historic Preservation Office because we're a certified local government. So that had some grant fundings. And then in the end, the publishing and the printing cost was the city, and we will make that money back with the sales of it. So we are not making money on the project, but we did get grant funds to pay for what we aren't making money on.
So you paid the person who did the work.
Correct,
And
by
then for the
contract.
book to be put together, that's, I just noticed that there will be someone will be sitting to go over the book down at Frankie's. Is that place called?
Excuse me?
Frankie's, did I say Frankie's? Frankie's.
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 She will be making presentations in each ward. The kickoff is in Cranky's tomorrow, but she will be attending. There are 2 wards yet to be scheduled, and that was just because of the site. We couldn't get in there, and unfortunately, your ward's one of them, but we're working on it.
I was using this opportunity so you could say something about it, because the more folks hear about it,
Yeah.
the more interest you're going to have in it.
Great. Yes, thank you. I'll put a plug in, and I'll take advantage of it. Tomorrow night at Cranky's at 6 o'clock, the author is going to be there for the kickoff, but please, their schedules, and we're going to have them up in the rec center. Haynes Hosiery is the next one. It's next Tuesday, 6 o'clock. We are going to be at either the libraries or the rec center, so they're accessible for people. Books will be sold at the locations, and we will be in everyone's ward, and we've tried to work your schedules in so you can be there. So, and we'd like to see as many people come out, and we are trying to get it to all the neighborhood heads and things like that, because we do want everybody to know about it. So it's very exciting. We've got a lot of positive comment about it. So,
And that would be a good, nice thing for TV 13. Thank you. All righty. Thank you very much. We'll now
Thank
go
you.
to
Thank you.
G1. Secretary, read that.
Resolution authorizing the sale of Center City parking deck and the Holly Avenue surface parking lot under the upset bid procedure of North Carolina General Statutes 168-269, located in the Northwest Ward. This item was continued from the February, March, and May meetings of the Finance Committee.
Which person would like to answer questions, comments? Mr. Turner, can you kind of, since this has been, at least this is the 4th meeting, kind of review where we started and where we kind of are now?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. Staff came to you back in February to ask for direction on a request to sell the parking deck at Center City West. Several months' worth of discussions and question and answers for council led the committee last month to ask us to bring forward a resolution for actual purchase, an actual offer, if you will, and that resolution and offer would be subject to the upset bid process. There's an item at your places indicating that after your agenda package was put together for this month, we actually had an increase on the offer development from the person that we've been dealing with for several months. And then we got a second offer from someone else in written form. And so at your places, there's a summary, a table that summarizes the 2 different offers. As you'll see, they really only vary by distance from the site and by the amount of new development that they would generate. After reviewing that and other information, the chairman of the committee asked us to bring forward to you, instead of a resolution for sale, bring forward something that would direct staff to go back out to the public and ask the general development community for proposals. This would allow the committee and the council to consider not just what the offer price would be, but also what the development potential would be. To that end, what we have put in front of you is a package that summarizes, as I think it's called attachment or
It's in G1, guys. It's
Exhibit A. a list of minimum requirements that any bidder or proposer would have to meet if they wanted to purchase the debt. This is proposed to your committee, and staff is amenable to any changes you wish to make.
So, yes, Ms. Light, you have your hand up.
Just a question. In an upset bid process, I thought the price needed to increase.
It does.
I mean, the bid
It
needed
does.
to increase, and this.
Well, we haven't done it yet.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but why did we even accept a bid that did not increase the offer?
These aren't bids. These are more just kind of proposals.
Yeah,
Uh,
still.
Yeah. We will formally go out for RFQs. Is that right?
If this is approved, then staff would go out with RFPs.
RFPs.
And I guess one of the things that may be confusing is that with a traditional upset bid process, once you've made the decision, once council has acted, then the upset bid prices can only be, the upset bids can only be for the price of the purchase. So if someone came in and wanted to offer you a bigger development that was twice as much taxable new development, you would not be able to consider that as an upset. However, right up until the point where council makes its decision, you can consider that as part of your proposal review process.
Question from the chair here. Would it not make sense for us to kind of put together what we think is what we want, and then they can bid and upset each other?
That's what
Like, for example, we have on this piece of paper, we have two bids with the same dollar amount. One's saying he'll spend more money. The other one's saying it's going to be further away. I mean, does it make sense for us to pick and choose and say, this is what we want you to bid on?
If you'll take a look at Exhibit A, staff has attempted to put a list of recommended minimum requirements for proposers that capture the capability of both bidders.
Good.
And would therefore be a starting point for any kind of proposal package that you might get.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I was going to ask, anytime you have something as important as this, you need to give full information. In fact, Exhibit A should have been read so the people who may not be aware of what's going on would better understand it. So I would like for him to read so we get a better idea.
Go over what
the minimum requirements on the proposal would be the purchase price would have to be $2 million. The closing date would have to be within 6 months of the council action. The new taxable development would have to have a minimum price of $21 million, and you'll see this information there on the projector Mr. Page is presenting. The time allowance for the new development would be 4 years, meaning that a development would have to be built of $21 million within 4 years. The maximum distance to the new development would have to be within 2,000 feet. The number of spaces reserved for the public in the deck after the sale occurs would be a minimum of 66, and they would have to be reserved for 20 years. The Holly Avenue parking lot, which is to the south of the parking deck, would be reserved for public use, and if it was redeveloped, it could be redeveloped for residential activity only. And also that parking lot would serve as parking for the baseball stadium when needed until it's developed, if it is developed. And finally, the city does have a long-term lease with Wells Fargo that would be transferred to the purchaser, and that revenue from the lease would be required to be part of the purchaser's offer when they are making their proposals.
So we would keep the revenue from the next?
No, they would receive the revenue.
Okay.
They would include the revenue effects in
Their purchase price. So they own it, they get the money for the whatever many months are left.
There's 3 years roughly left, and they would receive it for that period.
All right. I had a number of hands up, so I'll just start with Mr. Montgomery. We're going around the table.
When I first came to discuss this, before I knew about all these other pieces of the puzzle, I was coming in with one perspective. But even just with the last comment that was made in reference to the lease, it's highly concerning to me for several reasons as we look at the overall parking deck and this whole conversation around it. I think we first started this conversation out and looking at the dialogue around the development that was being proposed, which I think is a great development, and we should support that in ways that we can. One question quickly: have we received the payment for this year from Wells Fargo? Is that done monthly, quarterly, annually? How is that payment done?
I'm being told it's monthly.
So it's a monthly payment. So at this point in time, it was on monthly payment that we received from them on that amount. For me to even consider supporting the portion that goes out for sale, the sale price would have to go to the sale price would have to include the city receiving those revenue funds. Because to me, it makes no sense if 4 years from now they're going to build this project on both of those. If we maintain ownership of the deck through 2018, we receive the $312,000 annually, and then we can sell it for $2 million, and we get both of those dollars. To me, this just doesn't seem totally thought out on all of the pieces that make me concerned. And so I have some questions on this that just cause me some uneasiness, particularly when we look at the dollar amounts associated, because if they're going to pay $2 million for this and they get to keep the revenue, they paid $1 million for this, because roughly there's $945,000 plus what's half for $315 for this rest of this year or whenever it closed. So they literally pay $1 million for the parking deck based upon the revenue that comes. And I don't think that's a good assessment in terms of selling something like this.
Okay. Mr. Mayor?
Well, I certainly appreciate Councilmember Montgomery's points there, but my recollection, Mr. Turner, even with the revenues, the city is losing about $160,000 a year or thereabouts.
Approximately, yes, sir.
So it doesn't make any sense to me for the city to keep the deck for another 3 years, lose $160,000 over that 3 years, and then sell it. Why not sell it now, cut our losses, and put $2 million in the bank and go forward? Now, my understanding is probably the $2 million estimate to sell it was based on the revenues coming in from Wells Fargo, and I certainly appreciate what Councilman Montgomery is saying in that regard. But I believe that that's been taken into consideration for the value.
Mr. McIntosh?
Yeah, I think we're in a great situation here to find out what this deck is really worth.
Mm-hmm.
We've got two motivated buyers, and I think they're going to put their pen to paper. And if one of them is successful, the other one can still come back and upset. So I think we'll get market value out of this. We'll know what it's worth to the market. And besides that, there's no one else is going to acquire it except one of these two developers, unless somebody else jumps in. But we'll know a market price by the time this deal closes. My questions are, a couple questions on it are, the time frame, the 4 years is to finish the project. Should we have something in here that says when you have to start the project?
Yeah.
That also, to me, relates to, does the developer own the property that this is going to support? Let's look at both of those and make sure that we're committing ourselves to somebody that's actually already under contract or even closed, or do it simultaneously.
It's my understanding that the two bidders do currently own property downtown. At least I know one does, and the other one is getting ready to, hasn't already acquired it.
Getting ready to and close.
Well, they may have, I don't know, does anybody know if they've closed on the other building? They have not, but it is in the
It'd be good
works.
for us to know.
Okay. Yeah.
And so, and then also, what happens if if either one of them falls short on their investment? How do we claw back? How do we get our money back?
Mr. Taylor, I'm just going to round table if you got anything.
I think we're losing money on the parking deck. I don't think that's an arguable statement. But I think there are a lot of entities that we as a community and as a council lose money on. We lose money on rec centers. We lose money on a lot of things. For me, the question is this a service that we want to provide to our community? The way downtown, as I always say, is growing, expanding. I'm down there just about every weekend. I think public parking is a service we ought to be providing to our community. So it sounds like this committee and the folks around the table are sold on selling the deck, or who we're going to sell it to, the upset bid process. Well, I'm not past that. I'm a little bit before that. I don't know if it's even a good idea to sell the deck. Every piece of property we get that we sell it under the auspices of it doesn't make money, when we haven't done our due diligence to try to get in position to make money. We've done that with the convention center. The convention center wouldn't make money. We hired some private folks to come in, and we're doing okay from what I understand. I don't think that we cut our losses and run here. I think we stand strong. We provide the service to our community. We bring some folks in possibly who want to partner and help us to turn a profit. But I think if you cut off the public parking down on that end of 4th Street, I think we're doing our citizens a disservice. So not only am I not considering, Mr. Chairman, the upset bid process and who we should sell it to and for how much we should sell it, I'm contemplating whether we should be selling it, and I believe the answer is no.
Okay. Ms. Light, do you have any comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tell me how far 2,000 feet is, Mr. Turner?
Roughly 4 long city blocks, the long blocks of the north-south.
I don't know if it's correct to ask what properties these two entities are contemplating developing.
Well, we know that one is immediately across the street.
Okay, yeah, we do
Mr.
know
Mr.
that one, and the other is a little further away.
Is it worth, I don't know if that's public knowledge.
I don't know that it's public knowledge. I do know that it's within it's obviously 1,000 feet away. He indicated that in his proposal. The first developer who you've been talking about for several months, his development is at the corner of 4th and Broad, and that is publicly known. And he's planning to do something else on another corner at that same intersection, as well as a couple of blocks to the west.
Okay.
The west, okay, thanks.
Ms. Light, continue.
Yes, thank you. At first I was thinking that, sell it, get rid of it, that sort of thing, because we're losing money on it. But I'm sort of being swayed by the thought of keeping that, working a deal with whatever developers do in the area, rent out spaces to them. We may have been losing money on it because there hasn't been the residential interest in that area and parking interest in that into 4th Street. So I'm sort of thinking the city ought to keep that and work a deal with whoever has developments in the area to rent spaces.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bessie. I'm just going around the table here. You got any comments?
I think this is probably an issue on which reasonable minds can differ and clearly do. I think we ought to sell it if we can get a good deal, get the value of it, and the suggested terms here include retaining a minimum number of spaces for public use. I don't think it's an either-or. I think when you look down the road at the price of maintenance and long-term repair of facilities like this, it's a huge financial liability for the public, and one that does not appear as necessary for the public to take in order to maintain the service. This is the kind of service that I think it is good for the private sector to do when the private sector is willing and prepared to step forward and do it. I don't feel that way about everything that is done by government by any stretch of the imagination, but I do feel that way about parking decks. In this case, I think we can use this asset to leverage additional development in the area, that would be strongly in the public's best interest, and I think we should sell it if we can get the right deal for it.
Okay. Ms. Burke?
I've heard some very good comments as you all were talking. I agree with Councilman Matella about citizens needing a place that we don't have to pay so much to park. And the development that we're doing downtown is much different than how downtown looked a long time ago. And I agree with Councilman Light. I think if we can find a way that we would make money. But I think we need to do a little more investigating, City Manager. And I was thinking, you all may think this is strange. When I came to Winston, and you talk about people and economics, and a lot of the taxpayers are paying, and this is some of their businesses that we're getting ready to sell, tax dollars used. It was only a nickel to put in the parking lot, that little thing. And I didn't even have a nickel that I wanted to spare to put, and I would walk from Cranky's, as y'all say it's Cranky?
Yes, ma'am.
From Cranky's up to Tall Hammers. You all know where that is, don't you? Mm-hmm. And there are still people with the economic, I've got it, I could spend a whole lot of nickels now. God's been good to me. But I have to think about those who don't. And if we're saying downtown, I read about it, I hear about it, it's the living room for everybody. Those who may have the funds and those who may not have the funds. So I would say that we need to do, and I agree with something I heard the Councilmember Bessie say, we need to do a little more studying of this, Mr. Chairman.
Do you have any specific questions you'd like to ask?
No, they know some questions from what they hear us saying. They have them already. Do you clearly understand? Mm-hmm. All right.
Ms. Adams.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with most of the comments that have been made about selling the decks or anything else going forward. Again, we live and learn just like other people do from some of the decisions we make, and it's okay because we're supposed to get better. I think we need to treat it just like you sell a house or any other piece of real estate. If people want it, then it's the seller's market. And I think if we're going to do this, Chair, we need to look into possibly what other cities have done or are doing in scenarios like this. Have they been able to hold on to their infrastructure, parking decks and that sort of thing, and yet it was profitable, or even when it comes to the city's coffers, that they made out okay. I think we need to do that just like we've done on other things. I think we need to keep in mind when we do this going forward, just like we're doing with mass transit, we might want to ask for some of the citizens' input on this, because some of the decisions that we're making, we make them because we represent the citizens, but it pays to let them tell us too how they feel about this, because the people that go downtown all the time, they might say, we need the parking deck, whereas when I go, I don't use the parking deck. I find a place on the street, and like Ms. Burke said, I put the money in the meter. When we sold the Coliseum to the buyer, and the buyer then went out and contracted an event planning agency to run their events because we hadn't done a very good job of doing what we do, and it's because at the time we didn't think, well, go get somebody. There's subject matter experts out there to bring them in and help us make this better. I think we could learn from that too if we would possibly look into what other agencies, partners out there we can get that would partner with us on this in order for us to be able to make a profit. So in review, I think we need to look at how other cities are handling or have handled these types of scenarios with infrastructure, and what are our chances, or can we go and find someone to come and tell us or contract with us so that we don't have to sell the deck in order to keep parking for the public. I believe with the ballpark and all of what's going down there and those parking decks that might come, might not, I think we need to look at whether we are looking at the whole picture versus that piece of property in a vacuum.
Okay, Mr. Montgomery, you have your hand up.
I did. One question that I'd like to be examined, and I know I've had this conversation with the city manager in reference to this in terms of the lease, and when we first had the conversation about this, the lease wasn't a part of the discussion, but now, as it's on this piece, it's a part of the conversation in terms of the transition of that. But with that lease, I would like to know if there's an opportunity for an early termination of that lease in terms of we go to Wells Fargo and say we're going to sell this deck. If you want to get out of this lease at this point in time, we can come in at this time and we'll take half of what is remaining on this lease in order for you to terminate this lease at this time and to sell wherever we're going to sell the lease to. Sell the parking deck to. Is that an option that's on the table to be considered?
We looked at that with the consultation of the city attorney's office, and the way the agreement is written, it is silent on any kind of early termination. However, what the attorney has judged is that Wells Fargo is obligated to pay the city for the full 20 years of the initial agreement, so long as the city can continue to provide the spaces for those 20 years. Therefore, if the city sells the deck and can't provide the spaces, Wells is able to get out of the contract. If the city sells the deck and the new owner is willing to provide those spaces to Wells, then Wells is still obligated to pay the city for the full 20 years.
I totally understand that, but the question specifically is, can we go to them and say, hey, we want you are obligated to pay this through this term, but we have not committed to sell the deck yet. So as it stands now, we're still in the driver's seat of that. So if we say to them, would you be willing, because as it's stated, there's not a full use from Wells Fargo of that. If you want to end this lease early and pay us out half of what you owe or some percentage of what you owe, then what does that look like? I understand that they're obligated through that term, but if they don't need it and we are looking at it, and I'm talking about how we get the best deal, what is the best deal for the citizens of Winston-Salem? That's what I'm specifically looking at. And the second piece goes back to what came at the last committee meeting, specifically on the actual price and value of the deck, as that is compared to the same numbers that we received on the same day in discussion with the parking deck up the street. Those numbers do not correlate, because if you put the same dollar amount in terms of the cost to build the deck down the street on this, it takes the value up on this deck more than it did on that one. So to me, those numbers conflict in terms of price per space, in terms of what was looked at in terms of the development cost. And I'd like to see how those numbers can be reconciled to help me understand if I was looking at that wrong or if that is in fact some piece that conflicts.
Mr. Bessie had his hand up.
Yeah, I think Councilmember Adams had a good suggestion. Let's reality check our suppositions, and mine could be dead wrong from other cities' experience with similar facilities. I suspect what we're going to find is that this is not a money-making proposition for cities.
Yes.
Is that it's a money-eating, service of taxpayer dollars, and if we can get the private sector to provide it without that drain, then we should. If I'm wrong, I'm prepared to change my mind, vote the other way. Well, let's double check that, and keep in mind what we mean by public. In this case, I think, and again, please correct me if I'm wrong, I think what we're talking about is mostly institutional use, as opposed to people pulling up to park for an hour to go into a restaurant, for example. I think most of us that go into the restaurants in the evening are taking advantage of the fairly plentiful, street space within a block or two, like Councilmember Adams and I do, and that we're not looking at the reality of losing a public service or public access when we consider selling the deck and using it as leverage for development and stopping the draining of annual taxpayer subsidy of the facility. This is not a free service. The taxpayers are paying for having the deck there, and I don't think, prepared to be corrected if I'm wrong, I don't think the taxpayers are getting their money's worth out of what we're putting in annually on a subsidy, particularly if we can get a fair purchase price for the facility and use it to leverage additional development in the area.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, I think everybody's making really good points here. When we did the deck originally, the only reason we did it was because at that time Wachovia was willing to do a major investment up the street. In order for us to do the deck, they entered into the long-term lease, which is going to run out in 3 years. Mm-hmm. But even with that lease and that commitment, we're still losing money. With a major commitment of dollars, we're still losing money. So I think Councilmember Bessie is exactly right. Cities should not be in the business of creating enterprises that are losing money, basically. And we've got an opportunity now to not only stop that bleeding, but also to get at least a $21 million project, which would produce over $100,000 a year in city taxes alone. So that's a $250,000 swing annually to the citizens of Winston-Salem. So I think we should move deliberately, certainly, look at the information, but Councilman McIntosh is exactly right. We're going to find out what the real market value is with two motivated buyers.
I think one of the assumptions that we might be making is that what Wells Fargo is currently paying us for space in that deck is going to remain constant after a transaction occurs, and I don't believe that's correct, because when that transaction occurs, their lease with us is broken, they're going to come back and negotiate on what their real level of usage is, which I think is very small. It's much less than what they had originally forecasted. So I don't think there's a pot of gold on the other side of this transaction as far as income from Wells Fargo.
Let me just make a few comments and we'll kind of see where we want to go. First off, I do support selling the deck. I asked the question at the very first meeting, how many people use it? Usage is less than 8%. Virtually nobody uses this deck. Even Wells Fargo, who's paying for it. I think Mr. Bessie used the term institutional. I think the folks you find parking here are folks that are there from 8 to 5. It's not restaurant parking. There's very little retail stuff down that way. Ms. Adams mentioned the concept of partnering. Well, that's exactly what we're doing here. There are two people that want to partner with us. They're committing at least $21 million worth of investment, and part of the partnering is they want to buy out the deck. This issue of the Wells Fargo payment, you can put it in or take it out, but you have two motivated buyers. They know that, and they will adjust the price accordingly. I'm a very big believer in the free market system. If we keep the money, then they're going to adjust their price accordingly. I will say if we keep the money, then the deck is really unusable for 3 years because Wells Fargo has 500 of the 700 spots reserved, something like that, round numbers. I don't think you're going to find a better time to get rid of a money loser that is really going to be a money loser once Wells Fargo starts paying, because Wells Fargo does not want it. They don't use it now. We are asking people to write a check, and we do have two very motivated sellers, and I think we're going to get a very good market price for it with a commitment to spend a lot of money and to develop that area. Having said that, I would suggest we hold it for one more month. I think at some point we're going to have to just fish or cut bait here. I'm hearing some questions such as a buyout of Wells Fargo if we want to approach them and ask them how big a check would they write us today to get out of the last 36 months. Understanding that I think that will very much affect the purchase price of what people are willing to pay, because at least the way I think, and I'm certainly not a real estate developer, but this is going to take them a couple of years to develop, and if there's no income coming in, remember, they're writing us the check, they're going to have to pay interest on that money with no corresponding revenue to come in. Check with other cities to see what they have done. Mr. Montgomery brought up the issue of value. We have already had it appraised in the appraisal, and it's in our notebooks. The MAI, real estate appraisal, has indicated the market value is $2.1 million. And I would certainly suggest if we do go with the Exhibit A that we change the minimum bid to $2.1 million. That would at least match the quote market price, and then we'll see where we go from there.
Chairman Clark?
Yes, yeah.
If I may, the reason that what I brought up on value is that looking at that value compared to what we got at that same meeting with the other deck that was in consideration, it conflicts in terms on price per parking space. And I just would like information in terms of
so we can go through and explain the new value versus the depreciated value of the existing deck.
But I do also, to get it back, we did get what we sold the other two decks for on a per space basis, and I think it's in the same ballpark, but you can get that information back out to us.
It's just the value to build a brand new parking deck is around $16,000 a space.
Oh, I understand that, but this is not a new deck. This is a 20-year-old deck in an area that doesn't need it. There are companies out there that build decks, and that's who we sold Cherry Street to. There are companies, and I can't remember the names, but they're public traded companies that own parking decks, but nobody would buy, other than a developer is going to pay any money for a deck which no one uses. And you say, well, we got to build something around it to use. Well, the folks that own the land around it are the ones that are bidding on the deck. So anyway, I don't hear any objections, we'll hold it 1 month, try to get a little more information. And I did notice in here that some of the information in prior months was not here, or else I didn't see it, as far as what the other decks sold for on a per space basis, things of that sort, and check whatever.
Yeah, we need
And I will say, the biggest deck in town loses money too, the Church Street. But anyway, we'll do that, and I do think at some point we need to send it forward and just vote it up or down and move on with it. I do understand this is something that reasonable folks can disagree with, but I certainly like the idea of two very motivated people bidding on it right now. I think we'll be surprised what we will get for it. And a lot of new investment downtown. Is that okay with everybody?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
I think it's good we've had this discussion, because when we, later on, people will say that we did not give time, or we did this, so they will know that we did give time.
And if staff will notify the two potential bidders, we're going to hold it 1 more month. And I'm going to kind of do a gentleman and ladies agreement up here that we're going to send it forward in a month, for better or worse.
Do we get to know who those folk are? We know who one is, but I don't know if everybody...
Yeah, I don't know who the other ones are either. Maybe if that's allowed to be publicized, who the second interested party is.
Yeah, it's Greg Wilson representing Grove Properties.
Okay, well, So much for secrets.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you could send in a little information out about who they are, would be
I
helpful.
said, I know who the other person is. I may not know this one, so.
Well, I don't know who it is either.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did see it was Grubbs property.
Grubbs, yeah.
Okay, any other comments or questions on G1? If not, we will go to G2. The secretary will read that.
Resolution authorizing submission of Emergency Solutions grant application, acceptance of grants funds, and execution of a subgrantee agreement.
Good afternoon again. Mr. Tim West, who is our lead staff person for our homeless initiative, will make this presentation.
Okay.
Good afternoon.
Presentation, thank you.
Sure. This item is an item to allow us to apply to the state of North Carolina for HUD funds under the Emergency Solutions Grant Program for programs to serve homeless persons. It has been reviewed already by a citizens rating panel, the Continuum of Care, formerly known as the Homeless Council, and the Commission on Ending Homelessness. It's already been proposed to be part of the city's FY16 budget, and this item is to provide authority to apply to the state for these funds.
Thank you. Any questions from anyone here? Mr. Montgomery?
I just need to go on record. I cannot have any
I'm
discussion
sorry.
or comment in reference to this item.
I apologize. I knew that, and I should have asked for that. Mr. Montgomery will have to excuse himself from discussion and voting on both G2 and G3. Do we need a motion from the committee to excuse him for that, or is that?
No.
Okay, but just, if the records will reflect that he was
Yes.
excused from voting either way. Thank you. Yes, ma'am, Ms. Adams.
Yes, thank you. Again, since we're getting ready to wind up the budget process, we had a lot of organizations that applied for same said monies. Again, I would like to understand from staff or the continuum of care the relationship of overlapping services, being that we said that we've decreased chronic homelessness, we still have homelessness, and I just need to see, again, the correlation between all these buckets of money vis-a-vis state, federal, and the city as to, because we had some people didn't get any money, but I just need to understand that again. Okay?
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Taylor, excuse me, I'll get Ms. Burke. Go ahead.
Really quick, it looks like this item was recommended by a rating panel.
Yes.
Because of the amount of folks who have applied for funding and because of just accountability and transparency issues, let me say, if we can just, in the future, get a copy of who might be on these panels.
Okay.
I don't see that information listed here, but I'd like to have that if we're going to consider that on Monday.
Okay, if we could do that on Monday, and maybe a list of everyone who applied for these funds. Is that list too long?
Not long at all.
Okay, thank you. That would give us all the information, I think, Mr. Montgomery. Mr. Taylor.
Yeah, we all look alike.
The good looking, excuse me, the good looking one. I get y'all mixed up. Ms. Burke.
Your mouth gonna keep right on.
Yeah, keep going.
Mr. Chairman, I was gonna ask us.
That's a compliment.
No
Go ahead.
talking, please.
Go ahead.
I was gonna ask a question, and I was gonna make a comment similar to the ones I've heard, because I do think we need to know a little bit more about it, and then the other agencies who may not be getting anything will have a better understanding.
Okay, so reported earlier, we will get the committee members and everyone who applied.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And one more question.
Go ahead.
Where it says that the data entry and evaluation, I noticed year over year that money's, is put there, and the United Way gets it, but I'd like to know what that means.
Okay, that's on page 15.
Right.
Staff can give us a little information on the $38,650. All right. Do we have Mr. Bessie?
Yeah, just a quick question. These agencies in G2 are all the larger agencies that run the larger shelters. Was there a minimum on the number of spaces needed to be a part of this?
No. As far as beds?
Yeah.
No, sir.
It just happened that these are the larger entities that put in the application.
And I think these are all of the entities that applied.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Do I have a motion to approve?
Move for approval.
Is there a second? I'll second it then. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
I'm just abstaining, Mr. Antoine.
We have 2 in favor, none opposed, 1 abstaining, and 1 recusing. We will now go to G3. Secretary, read that, please.
Ordinance amending the project budget ordinance for the fiscal year 2014-2015 for the Bethesda Center.
Mr. Minor? I see you hiding back there. If you want to give us just a 1 minute.
This item is to amend the 14-15 project budget ordinance to reallocate $160,000 in contingent funding in the Housing Finance Assistance Fund. This is due to the HUD conflict of interest waiver that has been granted due to Councilmember Montgomery's position as Executive Director. This funding will be used to partially fund the requested $300,000 that the Bethesda Center had requested, and it's going to enable the center to hire 3 additional case managers and engage the community partners to provide these expanded services to approximately 100 guests. Just a general overview.
All right, thank you. Any questions or comments here? Mr. Brooks?
Yes, I would like to make a correction. The original proposal was for $300,000, and that was to service 100 guest clients and hire 3 additional case managers. Because that amount of funding is now $160 and not $300,000, the amount of guests, we've adjusted the budget and the goals. The amount of guests that would be serviced with that would be 75 and not 100, and the case managers would be 2 as opposed to 3, and the case management would be more of an intensive case management that's geared more towards providing permanent housing, because as many of you know right now, many of the homeless populations, they get into the cycle of receiving services, and it's just a cycle. So the attempt here is to provide some extra case managers to do the more intensive case management, which would involve developing individual plans for the guests and moving them more towards permanent housing to get them out of the cycle instead of having them just return over and over again.
Okay. Ms. Adams?
Yes. I'm glad to hear that. I think that if this works, which I'm going to be very positive that it will, maybe we can use this as a benchmark or a best business practice for other agencies. Mr. Brooks, if we document and watch the progress of it, we might have something here. With that, though, I know there's discussion, but I would move for approval of this agenda.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, Ms. Burke, you had your...
Yes, I was going to make a similar observation that we need to have some success stories, and I think when you come back again, it also makes other agencies know what they should be doing or not doing, and that we can not just give our tax dollars. There must be accountability.
Yes, we will.
Ms. Light?
Just from sitting on the Homeless Council, I can assure you that they are very excited about the success of this Housing First initiative, that it seems to be really making a dent. And so most of the partners in that are very pleased with it.
Okay. Ms. Mayor?
Just wanted to say that I'm glad that HUD agreed with our request to grant this waiver. I think it made eminently good sense for us to move in that direction, but it does free up our ability to use the $160,000 from the Housing Finance Assistance Funds for other projects, a little bit more flexibility there, so it's good news for us.
Good. Ms. Burke?
I see Mr. Merrick sitting out there, and I just can't wait to see the success of the Commons. And that should come to us, since they're going to do something really a little different, and the accountability ought to be.
Okay. Thank you very much. We have a motion and a second on the floor. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise. And we have 3 in favor, none opposed, none abstaining, and 1 recusing. Okay, folks, that's all for the regular agenda. We're now going to go to the budget, if that's okay with everybody. At your place is one piece of paper that's entitled Proposed Staff Changes to the Proposed Fiscal Year 15-16 Budget. If everybody will get that.
Okay.
No, Does everybody? Everybody look, see, Miss Adams? It was way underneath here.
You have the responses. Is he looking for the responses?
Thanks. Here we go. Thank you. And also, if you'll get out a fairly thick page of responses to questions, we'll do it first, and then we'll go over the single sheets. Everybody got both documents?
We do.
Yeah, this is an update. Let me go over the one that's stapled. It's probably 15, 20 pages here. What the staff does is they continue to add responses. So everything, a lot of stuff in here we've already gone over, but we will go over any new items that are in here, if that's okay with Mr. Minor. And let me just flip through here. I'm using, if you go to the first page in, it says table of contents. The stuff that's highlighted is what I'm going to go over. So I'm going to start with page 9. This was actually my request. This had to do with the per capita debt, and at the last one we showed that our GO debt per capita was $364, and if we included all types of debt, and that's cops and everything else except revenue, right? No revenue.
No revenue.
It's $846. And the reason I didn't include revenue bonds is a lot more than the citizens of Winston-Salem participate in that, so we'd have to include a lot more folks in that one. Next one is also on page 9, was the occupancy tax funding comparison. If you'll look below that, the question was asked, what do other people do with their occupancy tax money? And you see there what some of the other cities do, and it looks like to me they do a lot of funding of their convention centers and performing arts centers and things of that sort. Mr. Garrett, I believe we work with the TDA on
We do.
this. And Ms. Burke, I believe, aren't you still our representative there? Okay. Going down, I'm going to now go to page 18, which was the next items that were added. We had community agency funding sources and performance impacts, et cetera. A lot of verbiage here. I'm not going to read it all, but that was provided as well. And that's pages 18 and 19. This is very interesting. On page 22, this was one of my questions, and I was very enlightened by the response. This had to do with the percent that is recycled, and I asked how it was calculated because I was very surprised at the national number that was 35%, or in that range. What we learned is nationally they count yard waste, because that does not go to the landfill. We grind that up and we make mulch out of it, and that's leaves and limbs and stuff in the green bins and this, that, and the other. And that's how the EPA calculates it. If you leave that out and just consider household waste as a percent of total household waste, that's the last number, which is the 21%. But if you do it the way the EPA calculates it, we're actually at 55%. Okay. So more stuff does not go to the landfill than goes. So I think it would be helpful in future years if we use the EPA number to get. I think both these numbers are helpful. I am impressed that 21% of what comes out of a house goes into the recycling bin versus the normal trash. Matter of fact, I'll challenge you, Greensboro people, to match that. How about that? Give y'all something to think about. And it does list. And of course, we continue to work on that. We have added items over the years. We've added cardboard recently and other items. Okay. Next one was on page 31, and this was I also found enlightening. It gave us, I questioned the number of rounds of golf played at Winston Lake, but what I did not take into account is there's very little golf played in the winter, myself included. So you really can't use a weekly or a monthly average because there's virtually no one plays golf in January, February, November, December type. So on the top of page 31 are the number of rounds, as you can see, in July, August, September, even into October. It's pretty good usage, and April and May. Certainly November, December, January, February, and March there's a reason those would be lower, especially this last year when it's almost impossible to play certain of those years. Ms. Adams, you had a comment there.
Yes, I wanted to say that real golfers play all year round. Councilmember Clark.
Okay.
Anyway, I just want to let the public and the council know I was out there yesterday. I played around. I shot an 84. And
who's counting?
Yeah, I was.
No.
Good thing we're not on the oath.
It's real. But I wanted to tell people the back nine I shot a 44, the front nine I shot a 40.
Oh, that was.
And I had 2 birdies and 6 pars. Anyway,
go ahead.
Who all was out there?
It was my council. I love them to death. But anyway,
we may have an ethics problem.
The greens are in excellent shape. We haven't mowed them or cut them yet because we're kind of like, how you buy something. You have to follow the directions in order to ensure that you get the best product from what you've purchased. But the greens are excellent. The fairways, because we've gotten a lot of questions and comments from golfers, the fairways, they don't look that good. But I play all over the state, and nobody's fairways look good. Including Finley down at Chapel Hill, Grandover. The winter was bad, whether people thought it was or not, and everybody's fairways look really, really bad, dead, just bad, no grass or anything. But I can say our staff and department, they're working together to make it better. You can see they plugged a lot of the areas, and they're doing some heavy seeding. So if we would just get some rain, I think by fall it'll be okay, and I think Winston Lake again will be a pristine golf course like it was when it was first conceived and built years ago. So I just wanted to let you know that.
I appreciate that.
And the parking lot was full yesterday.
And I will say, I play at several courses, and it has been a devastating winter. There's dead grass everywhere right now. So anyway, those were the items that were added to this packet. You may certainly keep that for your reference, but those were the new items that were added. Now, if you will go to the one-sheeter that we talked about earlier, the proposed changes, I asked the city manager to canvass some folks, and he has come back with some suggestions here, which I will ask him to go over. Let me say to the committee, I would love to get this wrapped up and have a budget. Now, in just a few minutes, Mr. Taylor's committee, which is the Public Safety Committee, is going to go over specifically over the public safety budget. But as far as our responsibilities, I would love not to have to meet tomorrow and move something forward from here. Yeah. I will say as a preface, because we're not asking for any tax increase other than the 2.5 cents, which we told the voters when we had the bond referendum we would need to pay for the principal and interest on the bonds. The rest of the budget is a no tax increase. I have not heard any significant changes there. Mr. Garrett, if you wouldn't mind just touching what you got here, and then we'll see what other comments we have.
Sure. Chairman Clark, what you see here is that kind of summation of what I heard from council members and the mayor in conversations. I'm going to let Mr. Minor kind of go through them one by one.
Oh, okay, excuse me.
Specifically to
Meyer, if you'll just start with the first and go to the line.
Okay, I'll go through it first. And these are coming to you guys after our June 2nd workshop and our June 4th public hearing. And these are some proposed changes to the proposed fiscal year 16 budget. We have housing finance assistance, increased proposed contribution to Harry VCOS by $15,000 to bring that total to the total contribution to requested amount of $25,000. We're looking at an increase of $15,000 to Harry VCOS. Also looking at restoring contribution to the Liberty East redevelopment to fiscal year 15 amount, $31,150. So we have a total housing finance assistance fund expenditure adjustments of $46,150. Move down to the occupancy tax fund, have an increased proposed contribution to Old Salem by 12%. That comes to $12,440, and that's the rate of growth in the occupancy tax receipts to bring the total contribution to $116,070. We also have an increased proposed contribution to the Piedmont Triad Film Commission. Again, that's another 12% increase due to that being based on the rate of growth of occupancy tax receipts to bring the total contribution to $30,800. So we have a total adjustment in the occupancy tax fund of $15,740. Moving down, we have the general fund. We're proposing to restore contributions to successful outcome after release, SELF, to last year's funding level of $10,000, and we're going to reduce the general fund contingency appropriation by $10,000, and that is proposed.
Okay.
That's what we have. Answer any questions or
I
any
do have
comments?
one question, because we are reducing the Housing Finance Assistance Fund by $46,000, and I don't have my blue book in front of me. What's the balance in that fund? Is there plenty of money in there?
There is. I'd have to check that amount right now in the budget document.
And the same question, the revenue adjustments, Bob, same on the occupancy tax fund. Are there sufficient funds to do that?
The answer to that is yes.
Yes.
They are.
There are.
Okay. Any questions, comments? And I'm just looking at Ms. Light. She's got her hand up first. I'll start with you.
This brings us back to the chart we saw somewhere about the amount of occupancy tax that we receive. We really got to work on getting that up higher than what we receive, whether it's our portion of it or the actual rate that's charged, the tax that's charged on it. Certainly, if you look at some of the other cities that, especially Charlotte, my goodness, what they charge as a tax on occupancy. So, for future reference.
Is that a locally determined occupancy tax or a state?
No.
With the
State.
Charlotte's got a special little addition to cover
Right.
their NASCAR museum.
So we are charging what the state allocates us to charge.
Exactly. What you have, it's state legislation. It's actually on page 9 of your
Page
document.
9?
Yeah, page 9 of your
Yes.
response document.
That's
It
right.
kind of highlights what we receive, 1/6 of 6%. And those are different for different cities. You'll see Charlotte is slightly different. Their basis, the city of Charlotte sees a majority of the 8% occupancy tax collections from Mecklenburg County.
I think part of the challenge, and Mr. Garrett, I'll look to you in case I step on something here I'm not correct on, but part of it is working with the TDA and other budget line items to decide where we want to spend it, because we're giving some of it to support the convention center, the fairgrounds, support for Lawrence Stroll events, not the building itself, but events, and then public art. So there may be somewhat of a zero-sum gain. If we spend more here, we got to spend some less somewhere else.
That's correct. We only get part of it. Part of it, a big chunk of it goes to the TDA directly. So that
And
part
who
of that
determines that?
That's in the local act from the state.
So the
Determines.
state determines how much we get versus the TDA.
Right.
And the TDA spends it, and Ms. Burke sits on that committee.
Yeah, I was going to say, maybe the city manager just needs to explain the TDA, how the counties roll and how.
The Tourism Development Authority is created by local legislation from the state, and they work. Their mission is to recruit tourism events to Winston-Salem, so they work to do that around the clock. I can get you the specifics, but the 6% hotel motel tax is divided between the city, the county, and the TDA, as well as the small towns get a small amount. I think it's 5% of 2 cents, or how does it work, Ben? Ben knows, but it's a small amount that's also given to the small towns.
Yes, ma'am.
Add on, going back to Councilmember Light, say for instance, if this city felt that we need to have higher occupancy tax, what would we have to do to get that?
And typically, in most cases, in order to get the occupancy tax increased, you always have to get the General Assembly to authorize that. But usually, except in the case of Charlotte, the levy, the authorization is given to the county, and then the county has to adopt that additional tax. That's the way it was with ours and most of the other cities. I would note, too, that in those numbers that you see, both for Charlotte and for Raleigh, they also include a 1% prepared food and beverage tax, which generates millions as well.
Yeah.
And Mr. Chairman,
They have a 1% food and beverage tax.
Yeah.
it's always been political. It's been some elected officials have wanted to increase, but it's the pressures that from around. And those people in Raleigh will also have to be able to introduce that, and they get a lot of pressure.
Okay. Jack, get your question answered.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Mr. Bessie, I just see your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to check. I have not looked into the detailed information regarding Liberty East redevelopment or successful self. Just want to make sure that they were recommended at zeroed out in the budget recommendations that came to us.
That's right.
And I know that the committee we had vetting that was doing good work under pressure and had a limited amount of background to go on in some cases. Just want to make sure that we didn't have any adequacy of fiscal control issues raised for either of those.
No.
Does the staff know why the committee recommended reductions in those two items? That was Liberty, LER, and Self.
Liberty East redevelopment where Fairchild used to be. It
Yeah.
became that.
Okay.
The committee actually said that upon reviewing the application, there were several NAs, and they found it hard to evaluate the application. That was from the allocation committee itself. And the other you said was, you said Liberty and Self. I think actually Self, they said due to limited funding availability within the SOAR category, so they were limited in how much money they could actually allocate. So that was their restriction for Self.
Okay. Mr. Brooks, do you have a comment on something?
Yes, just in response to the question regarding Liberty East redevelopment, they have been funded for the past couple of years, and we have not had any audit findings or monitoring findings that would indicate that there's been any problem with the financial accounting or with the operation of the organization.
Okay. Thank you.
That answers my question.
May I
Yes,
just
ma'am.
add this? I guess the mayor, he was working for the city when we first went in there, a for-profit, a non-profit in the city of Winston-Salem. And not long ago, I asked Mr. Brooks, just tell us a little bit about LER. And those of you who've been there, you know they have people been volunteering hours after hours. A lot of good people have come in there as good mentors for folks. And then the people who have been the owners, well, the managers, they have made sure that they just didn't put in and everybody in there. Their rate of people living there can be seen as lower than some. Now, LER is the oldest corporation. And what did you tell me, Mr. Brooks, about it? It was something you shared. Where did he go?
He's right there. Yeah.
Yes, what I shared was that Ladera Crest was an apartment complex that was rehabbed probably over 20 years ago. And I shared with Dr. Burke that if you wanted an example of a good low to moderate income complex that was rehabbed and been maintained well over the years, it would be Ladera Crest. Maintenance has been very good, and it's been an ongoing relationship with management and the tenants, and it's been maintained very well over the years in comparison to other projects such as 10th Street, which we know was recently demolished by the Housing Authority and being rebuilt, Oak Creek, a number of those projects where money was spent some 20 years ago that are no longer with us. But Ladera Crest, if you were to go there today, you would probably think that that was a rehab that was done within the past 10 years. You'd be really surprised. So it's been maintained real well.
It's clean, the lawns, and we're working hard to eliminate any negatives, and it's a group of people who's been so committed. In fact, Wachovia, when we first started that, they wondered how could citizens develop what we developed with the city. It was a good project, and it still is. And thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Burke. Mr. Taylor?
I don't feel the need to say this. The staff has already answered the question, Councilmember Bessie, but I do work very closely with the Successful Outcomes After Release program. In reference to SELF, it's my understanding, as was stated, there are no fiscal control issues. And in fact, last fiscal year, they served as the fiscal control for two other agencies who needed a little bit of help. So they not only stood in the gap for themselves, but they did stand in the gap for two other agencies. And I felt, based on the job that they did deserve to be funded this year. And obviously the committee and the council felt the same way, just to answer your question.
Yeah, no, I didn't have any particular reason to believe that that was the issue, but sometimes when things get zeroed out in the recommendation, you know, it's
Good question.
It's due diligence to ask.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? If not, for the 4 members of the Finance Committee, I would look for a motion to adopt the budget with these changes to it.
I've got a question from an attorney perspective. For me, that there was in terms of how we move this forward with the items associated with Bethesda, that those items, that in terms of whatever those were, where I could and could not be in discussion on the rest of the budget item.
Yeah, if you turn to the draft the agenda we gave you on the back side,
Yeah.
page 2, what the city attorney has told me is that the committee will need to take separate votes on the revenue items as well, everything after the public hearing, so that Councilmember Montgomery doesn't have to vote on the third one under adoption of budget tax levy, project budget ordinance for federal housing. That's the one that he does not want to vote. It's not supposed to vote on.
Okay, let me just look at. We've had a public hearing. That's been done, correct?
No, everything below the public hearing.
Okay. So I need a motion to the ordinance amendment, Chapter 10 of the City Code relating to building regulations.
She would prefer that you take a vote on each one of these to send it forward.
Okay, and then which ones does Mr. Montgomery need to abstain on?
The project budget ordinance for federal housing funds. Third one down under adoption of budget.
Okay. Project budget order for the city of North Carolina fiscal year federal housing finance. Okay. If everybody turn to the back side, we will just go down these one at a time, and you see which one it is. This one here. And I'm just do the revenue. Do we have a motion for the ordinance amending Chapter 10 of the Finance City Code relating to building regulations?
I move for approval.
We have a second on that.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise. Next is the ordinance amending Chapter 26 of the Winston-Salem City Code relating to garbage and trash. Do we have a motion?
I move for approval.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise. Now, on the adoption of budget, tax levy, and capital plans. The first one is annual appropriation tax levy ordinance for the city of Winston-Salem, North Carolina for the fiscal year 2015-16. Do we have a motion?
I move for approval.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise. Next item is the project budget ordinance for the city of Winston-Salem, North Carolina for the fiscal year 2015-16.
I move for approval.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise. The next one is the project budget ordinance for the city of Winston-Salem, North Carolina for the fiscal year 2015-16 Federal Housing Fund, Housing Finance Assistance Fund, and I will recognize that Mr. Montgomery needs to be recused from voting on this. Do
I
have a
move
motion?
for approval.
Second.
We have a motion second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise. That's 3 in favor, none opposed, and 1 recusing. Next one is a resolution approving the capital plan for the fiscal year 2015-2016 through 2020-21 as a financial planning guide.
Move for approval.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise. Next is a resolution authorizing an interlocal agreement between the city of Winston-Salem and Forsyth County for grant funds to support the district attorney's domestic violence unit.
Move for approval.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise. And last items, resolution amending the personnel resolution of the city of Winston-Salem, making changes to the pay plan and other policies.
Move for approval.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise. And lastly, resolution approving the cost of living adjustments for the city of Winston-Salem police officers retirement system for fiscal year 2015-2016.
Move approval.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise. I know that's a lot of different motions, but I know, for example, the one on the garbage and trash was, I think, raising one of the rates, and those were fees that were changed, this, that, and the other. Yes, Ms. Adams has a comment, and we will be finished on time.
Yes.
Public safety starts at 6:30, so you've got a lot of
At
time.
6:30? Oh, excuse me. Public safety starts at 6:30. I'm sorry.
Thought we
Go
would
ahead.
be long. I just wanted to say, going forward with staff, as we move forward in the next, I'd say this quarter, I think we need to see what an increase in our taxes would provide to the citizens of Winston-Salem. I think we need to see that now versus later, because there are some things that we are not able to do, whether it's pay our employees, bridge the pay gap for them, provides other services to the city of Winston-Salem, whether it's our public safety, whether it's transportation, or any of those reentry organizations, housing, and all of those. I would like to see a scenario based on what's good, what's better, and what's best, and in increments of whether it's increase of 1 cent, 2 cent, 4 cent, or 5 cents, and what that would do for us to be able to, again, reach some parity with our other cities in the state versus, being right now able to brag that we have the lowest tax rate, but are we really cheating our citizens by not doing what we need to do as their representatives?
Thank you very much. Any other comments? Ms. Burke, I see you.
Mr. Chairman, I think as chairman of this committee, you need to make it clear this year we're not increasing taxes.
That's correct, other than the 2.5 cents that we said was going to happen with the bonds. Yes, ma'am. Mr. Montgomery?
Yes, comment. I think what we saw in one item that was brought forth in the midst of dialogue on this budget this year was a graph that showed the benefits from investments in economic development within our community. It showed how the tax base increased over the last few years on economic development projects within our community. And I bring up that in particular at this time because I would ask Chair, City Manager, we've had a conversation in particular when we look at making sure that we see a consistent funding source when it comes to making investment in economic development and housing moving forward, because we see a direct impact in terms of what that looks like for our tax base and how that expands our tax base when we make real investments in that. In particular, what I brought up, I think last week when we talked about Housing Finance Assistance Fund and how we invest in workforce housing and other housing projects in our community and economic development projects, that we oftentimes are relying on one-time sources of funding in order to fund those projects. And it makes all the sense in the world to be able to have a funding source that is consistent so that we see that consistent investment, which hopefully continues to see a consistent expansion of the tax base for our community. And so I hope we can bring that back sometime this year to have a continued conversation on how we can look at being able to do that moving forward.
Yes.
Ms. Burke?
As you know, not long ago, the city manager said that the mayor would like to have the public aware of the economic projects we have been working on. I want you to know that Mr. Brooks, along with his staff, will be taking a tour with the presidents and others around the city so they can see the economic development that this city has made, and they will gather down at the Courtland Plaza and have a little fellowship, because I think these are the people who've been committed to us, the neighborhood presidents and neighborhood people. And I think they'll be the best ones to give the message to the public, because sometimes we sit and we don't say the things we've done. But with the budget that we've been working with, this city, when folks come to it, it has moved forward. That's because partnerships, the mayor, with the council people and the city manager staff, understanding what budget we're working on, but we still have people who want to come, live, and develop in this city, and I think that's good.
Thank you, Ms. Burke. Ms. Taylor?
I'll make my final comments, Mr. Chairman.
Good.
As everyone has spoken, thank you, sir. I've gone around to 3 different communities in the last 2 weeks, and we've had in-depth discussions about this year's budget, about some of the bond projects that are coming. And what we did was we just kind of went out, I did a PowerPoint presentation with the staff's help, and we told them everything they will be getting in the Southeast Ward and more about rural areas for the bond project. So the folks in my ward were very excited about the bond project. No one likes to see higher taxes, but the voters approved that 2.5 cent raise, and I think they're very excited about the bang that they're going to get for the buck. We've talked about everything from the ballpark all the way to the quarry project in Salem Lake. So again, I'm only speaking on behalf of the folks that we've come in contact with in the Southeast Ward. We're very excited about this budget. We're not raising taxes outside of the bond referendum, and we're really getting a lot for the money that we're investing. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your leadership and members of the Finance Committee, and I'm excited about voting for this particular thing when it comes forward.
Yeah, I do want to compliment and thank my committee members and the staff for working very hard on the budget. I want to thank our guests from Greensboro to come. all I can say in conclusion is what you see here is a bunch of hardworking Democrats with some good Republican leadership. Thank you.